The scream tore through the canyon just as Ethan Fletcher rounded the bend with his cattle, a sound so desperate and raw that it made his blood run cold and his horse rear back in alarm. Rain had been hammering the Sierra Nevada foothills for 3 days straight, turning the red earth into rivers of sludge that carved new paths down the mountainside. Ethan had been driving a small herd of cattle to higher ground, away from the flooding creeks that threatened the lower pastures of the ranch where he worked. The April storms of 1878 had proven fiercer than anyone in Oroville, California could remember, and now, as he steadied his mount and listened, another cry echoed through the downpour. He spurred his horse forward, leaving the cattle to scatter as they would. The rain pelted his face, soaking through his hat and coat, but he pressed on toward the source of the screaming. As he crested a small rise, his heart nearly stopped at the sight before him. A massive mudslide had torn down the mountain, a churning avalanche of earth and stone that had carved a destructive path through the pines and oaks. And there, at the edge of where the slide had finally stopped its deadly descent, he could see her, a woman trapped beneath the weight of the mud, only her head and one arm visible above the brown morass. Ethan threw himself from his horse before the animal had fully stopped. His boots hit the rain-slicked ground, and he was running, sliding through the muck toward her. As he got closer, he could see she was young, perhaps 20 or so, with dark hair plastered to her skull by the rain and mud. Her eyes were wide with terror, her face pale beneath the grime. "Help me," she gasped, her voice breaking. "I cannot breathe. The weight, I cannot." "I have got you," Ethan said, dropping to his knees beside her. The mud was still warm from its violent journey down the mountain, thick as molasses and heavy as wet cement. He could see how it had caught her, likely sweeping her off her feet as she traveled through what had been a safe path just hours before. "What is your name?" "Miriam," she managed, coughing. "Miriam Foster. Please, I've been here so long." "Miriam, I'm going to dig you out," Ethan said, already plunging his hands into the mud around her shoulders. "You need to stay calm and keep talking to me. Can you do that?" She nodded, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "I was traveling from the mining camp. My father, he works there. I was bringing supplies back to Oroville when the mountain just came alive. I tried to run, but it was so fast." Ethan dug frantically, his strong hands pulling away great handfuls of the heavy mud. It was like trying to move a living thing, the earth sucking at his fingers, fighting him for every inch he gained. His nails tore, and his palms scraped against hidden rocks. But he did not stop. He could not stop. Not when he could see the way her breathing was becoming more labored, the way the mud seemed to be settling, compressing around her with its terrible weight. "Where is your father now?" he asked, trying to keep her focused, to keep her conscious. "At the camp still. I was alone." Her voice was getting weaker. "I thought I could make it before the worst of the storm." "Well, you are not alone now," Ethan said firmly. He had cleared the mud from around her shoulders and was working down her arms, feeling the way the earth had locked around her body like a vice. "I have been working cattle and horses since I was 12 years old. I've pulled calves from birthing and horses from bogs. I'm not about to let a mountain take you." He meant every word. Something about this woman, this Miriam Foster, with her frightened eyes and fierce will to live, had already burrowed into his chest. He had seen death before, had lost his own parents to cholera when he was 16, but the thought of this particular life, ending here in the mud, filled him with a determination that bordered on rage. The rain continued its relentless assault as Ethan worked. His arms burned with effort, his back ached, but he kept digging. He cleared her left arm, then her right, and then began the harder work of freeing her torso. The mud had settled around her hips and legs with crushing force, and he knew that moving the wrong way could injure her even as he tried to save her. "Talk to me, Miriam," he said when he noticed her eyes starting to flutter. "Tell me about yourself. Where are you from originally?" "Ohio," she whispered. "Columbus. We came west 2 years ago. My father thought we would find fortune." She coughed again, and he could hear the rattle in her chest. "I think we found only hardship." "California is not kind to everyone," Ethan agreed, his hands never stopping their work. He was down to her waist now, feeling the resistance of the mud lessen slightly. "But she has her moments. When the rains stop and the wildflowers bloom, when you can see clear to the valley from the high country, there's nowhere more beautiful." You love it here, Miriam said, and it was not a question. I do, Ethan admitted. I came from Texas after the war. Drifted for a while, working ranches, learning the land, found my way to Oroville 3 years back and decided to stay. The foreman at the Double Bar Ranch took me on. Good man, fair wages, honest work. He had reached her hips now and could feel how the mud had twisted her legs. Miriam, this is going to hurt, he warned. I need to free your legs, but they are caught badly. You need to be strong for me. Just get me out, she begged. Please, I do not want to die here. You are not going to die, Ethan said, and poured every ounce of conviction he had into those words. Not today, not here, not while I have breath in my body. He began the delicate work of freeing her legs, his hands following the line of her limbs down through the mud, carefully clearing away the earth while trying not to cause more injury. He could feel where her left leg was bent at an awkward angle and knew it was likely broken. But broken bones could heal. Being buried alive could not. Time lost meaning as he worked. The rain continued to pour, the sky growing darker with the approaching evening. Ethan's hands were raw and bleeding, his clothes soaked through, his body shaking with exhaustion and cold, but he did not stop. He talked to Miriam continuously, keeping her conscious, keeping her fighting. My mother used to bake bread, Miriam said at one point, her voice dreamy. Every Sunday. The smell would fill our whole house. I can almost smell it now. You're going to bake bread again, Ethan promised. You're going to do all the things you love. You're going to live, Miriam. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably less, he felt her right leg come free. Then her left, though she cried out in pain as it moved. With one final tremendous effort, he got his arms under her shoulders and pulled, dragging her from the mud's grasp in a great sucking rush. She came free all at once, and they both tumbled backward into the rain-soaked grass beyond the slide's reach. Ethan held her against his chest, both of them gasping, both of them shaking. He could feel her heart racing against his, could feel the way she clutched at his coat with desperate fingers. I have got you, he murmured into her mud-caked hair. You are safe now. I have got you. Miriam made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You saved my life. Could not do otherwise, Ethan said, though his arms tightened around her. Now that the desperate urgency of the rescue was over, he was suddenly aware of how small she felt against him, how fragile and yet how strong to have survived what she had endured. But there was no time for such thoughts. She was injured, soaked, and likely in shock. The rain showed no signs of stopping, and night was coming on fast. He needed to get her to safety, to warmth, to help. Can you ride? He asked, pulling back to look at her face. Even covered in mud, with her hair wild and her lips blue with cold, she was beautiful. The thought struck him with surprising force. I do not know, she admitted. My leg. Ethan looked down and saw the way her left leg was bent, definitely broken, possibly badly. We need to get you to town, to the doctor. Can you put your arms around my neck? She nodded, and with her cooperation, he managed to get them both to their feet, though she could not put any weight on her injured leg. His horse had wandered a short distance away, grazing unconcernedly despite the rain. Ethan whistled, and the animal lifted its head, then walked over with the resignation of a creature long used to its owner's odd demands. Getting Miriam into the saddle took some doing, but Ethan managed it, then swung up behind her. He settled her back against his chest, one arm around her waist to hold her steady, and took up the reins with his free hand. This is going to be rough, he warned. But Oroville is only about 5 miles. Can you hold on that long? With you here? Yes, Miriam said, and the trust in her voice made something warm bloom in Ethan's chest, despite the cold and the rain. They rode through the storm. Ethan's body curved protectively around Miriam's, sheltering her as best he could. She drifted in and out of consciousness, but he kept talking to her, kept her as alert as possible. He told her about the ranch, about the cattle, about the mountains in summer when the snow melted and the creeks ran clear and cold. He told her things he had never told anyone, thoughts and dreams he barely admitted to himself. And Miriam, when she could, talked back. She told him about her mother who had died during the journey west, about how she and her father had clung to each other in their grief, about the small cabin they lived in near the mining camp, about her dream of one day opening a bakery like her mother had always wanted. You will, Ethan promised. When you heal, You will do all those things." By the time they reached Oroville, full dark had fallen, though lights glowed in windows throughout the town. Ethan rode straight to the doctor's house, a neat white building on the edge of Main Street. He dismounted carefully, then lifted Miriam down, cradling her in his arms as he kicked at the door. "Doctor?" Samuel Harrison answered, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes that widened at the sight of them. "Good Lord, what happened?" "Mudslide up in the foothills," Ethan said, carrying Miriam inside. "Trapped her. Got her out, but her leg is broken, maybe other injuries. She's been in the cold and wet for hours." The doctor was already moving, directing Ethan to lay Miriam on the examination table in his surgery. "You did well to get her here. Most would not have survived what you describe." "He dug me out with his bare hands," Miriam said, her voice weak but clear. "The mud, it had me completely. He would not give up." Dr. Harrison glanced at Ethan's torn and bloody hands, then nodded. "I will need you to wait outside while I examine her. There is water and towels in the washroom. Clean yourself up." Ethan wanted to protest, wanted to stay by Miriam's side, but he knew the doctor needed space to work. He nodded reluctantly and backed toward the door, his eyes on Miriam until the last possible moment. In the washroom, he finally saw himself in the mirror and understood why the doctor had looked at him so strangely. He was covered head to toe in mud and filth, his clothes torn, his hands raw and bleeding. He looked like he had been through a war. He supposed in a way he had. Ethan cleaned himself as best he could, washing the worst of the mud away, though his clothes remained damp and stained. His hands stung fiercely when he submerged them in the water, and he could see deep scratches and cuts across his palms and fingers. He wrapped them in clean towels and went back out to the waiting area. It was a long night. Ethan sat in a hard wooden chair, exhaustion pulling at him, but he could not bring himself to leave. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Miriam trapped in that mud, saw the fear in her eyes, heard her voice begging for help. The memory made his heart race and his hands clench despite the pain. He dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, until finally the sky began to lighten with the gray dawn of another rainy day. The door to the surgery opened, and Dr. Harrison emerged, looking tired but satisfied. "She will live," he said simply, and Ethan felt his whole body sag with relief. "The leg is broken, as you suspected, but it is a clean break. I have set it and splinted it. She will need to stay off it for several weeks, but she should heal well. She has some bruising to her ribs, nothing broken there, thankfully. Mostly she is suffering from exhaustion and exposure. She needs rest, warmth, and time." "Can I see her?" Ethan asked, rising from his chair. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "She has been asking for you. Brief visit only. She needs sleep." Ethan entered the surgery quietly. In the morning light filtering through the window, Miriam looked impossibly small in the large bed where the doctor had moved her. Her dark hair had been cleaned and braided, and she wore a clean white nightgown. Her face was pale but peaceful, and when she heard him enter, her eyes opened. "You stayed," she said softly. "Of course," Ethan replied, moving to stand beside the bed. "I had to make sure you were all right. The doctor said you saved my life, that another hour and the cold and the pressure would have killed me." Tears welled in her eyes. "I do not know how to thank you." "You do not need to thank me," Ethan said, surprising himself with the roughness in his voice. "I just needed you to live." Something passed between them in that moment, something unspoken but profound. Miriam reached out her hand, and Ethan took it gently in his bandaged one. "I feel like I know you," she whispered. "After all those hours, all that talking, I feel like I have known you forever." "I feel it too," Ethan admitted. He had never been good with words, had never been the type to speak pretty sentiments, but something about Miriam made him want to try. "When I heard you scream, when I saw you trapped there, something in me just knew I could not let you go. I could not let that mountain take you." "My hero," Miriam said, smiling despite her exhaustion. "My cowboy hero." "Just a ranch hand," Ethan corrected gently. "But yours if you want." Miriam's smile widened. "I want," she said simply. Dr. Harrison appeared in the doorway. "That's enough for now. She needs rest, and frankly, young man, so do you. You look ready to fall over." Ethan nodded reluctantly, but before he left, he squeezed Miriam's hand gently. I will be back, he promised, every day until you are well. I will hold you to that, Miriam said. Ethan returned to the ranch in a daze, riding through the continuing rain in a fog of exhaustion. The foreman, Jack Sullivan, took one look at him and sent him straight to the bunkhouse with orders to sleep. Ethan collapsed onto his narrow bed and was asleep almost before his head hit the pillow. He dreamed of dark eyes and desperate hands, of mud and rain and a voice crying for help. He dreamed of holding someone precious, of feeling their heartbeat against his chest, of the fierce protective instinct that had roared to life inside him. When he woke, it was afternoon, and the rain had finally stopped. Weak sunlight streamed through the bunkhouse windows, and he could hear the other ranch hands going about their work outside. His hands ached, bandaged now by one of the other men, and his whole body felt like it had been trampled by cattle. But all he could think about was getting back to town, back to Miriam. Over the next several weeks, Ethan kept his promise. Every day after his work was done, he rode into Oroville and sat with Miriam. At first, she was confined to bed, weak and in pain, but as the days passed, she grew stronger. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other in the way people do when time stretches out before them. Miriam told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her mother's garden and her father's stories. She spoke of the journey west, the hardships they had faced, the hope that had driven them despite the losses. She had a quick wit and a sharp intelligence that fascinated Ethan, and he found himself looking forward to their conversations more than anything else in his day. In turn, Ethan opened up in ways he never had before. He told her about his parents, about the war and what he had seen, about the years of drifting before he found his place in Oroville. He shared his dreams of one day having his own small ranch, just a few acres and some cattle, a place he could truly call home. "You deserve that," Miriam said one day as she sat by the window in Dr. Harrison's guest room where she was recovering. Her leg was still splinted, propped on a stool, but she could move about with crutches now. "You deserve all the good things." "So do you," Ethan replied, sitting across from her. "What will you do when you heal? Go back to your father?" Miriam's expression grew troubled. "I suppose I must. He will be worried. Someone from the mining camp came to town, and I was able to send word that I was alive and recovering, but I know he will want me home." "But?" Ethan prompted, hearing the hesitation in her voice. "But I do not want to go back to that life," Miriam admitted. "Living in a drafty cabin, cooking over an open fire, watching my father break his back in the mines for specks of gold that never amount to anything. I want more. I want the bakery. I want a real home. I want—" She trailed off, color rising in her cheeks. "What do you want, Miriam?" Ethan asked softly, leaning forward. She met his eyes, and the longing there took his breath away. "I want to stay here. I want to build a life in Oroville, and I want—" She paused, then continued more quietly. "I want to see where this goes, this thing between us." Ethan felt his heart begin to race. "There is a thing between us?" "Do not tease," Miriam said, but she was smiling. "You know there is. I have felt it since that first moment, when you knelt beside me in the mud and promised you would not let me die. Every day since, it has grown stronger. Tell me you do not feel it too." "I feel it," Ethan said roughly, rising from his chair to cross to her. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his carefully. "God help me, Miriam. I feel it so strongly it terrifies me. I have never felt this way about anyone. When I thought I might lose you, when I was digging you out of that mud, all I could think was that I needed you to live. Not just survive, but live. Be in this world. Be where I could know you, talk to you, see you smile." "Ethan," Miriam breathed, tears shining in her eyes. "I am not a rich man," Ethan continued, the words pouring out now that he had started. "I have some savings, enough to make a start on that dream of my own place someday, but it would be a hard life at first. But I am a hard worker, and I am honest, and I would spend every day trying to make you happy. If you would consider, if you think you might, someday, want to build that life with me." "Are you asking me to marry you?" Miriam asked, her voice shaking. Ethan took a deep breath. It was fast, probably too fast by all conventional standards. They had known each other only a few weeks, and most of that time she had been recovering from her injuries. But he had never been more certain of anything in his life. "Yes," he said simply. I'm asking you to marry me. Not today, not until you are healed and ready, but someday. Soon. I'm asking you to take a chance on a cowboy who fell in love while digging you out of a mudslide." Miriam let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Ethan Fletcher, I will marry you. I will take that chance. Because I fell in love too, with a man who would not give up, who saved my life with his bare hands, who has sat with me every single day and made me believe in hope again." Ethan rose just enough to lean forward and kiss her, gentle and careful, mindful of her injuries, but unable to resist any longer. Miriam's hands came up to frame his face, and the kiss deepened, full of promise and possibility, and all the feelings they had been building toward since that terrible, wonderful day in the rain. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Miriam was crying openly, but her smile was radiant. "We should tell your father," Ethan said practically, though he could not seem to stop touching her, his thumb brushing her cheek, her jaw, her hand. "And my foreman, there will be arrangements to make." "My father will be surprised," Miriam said with a laugh. "But I think he will be happy. He has been so worried about me, about what will become of me. He will be glad to know I have found someone good." "When can you travel?" Ethan asked. "To the mining camp, I mean. I should meet him properly, ask his blessing." "The doctor said perhaps another week before I could handle the journey," Miriam replied. "My leg is healing well, but the trip is rough." "Then we wait a week," Ethan said. "I want to do this right." Those 7 days passed in a blur of anticipation and planning. Ethan saved every spare cent from his wages, already calculating what they would need for a simple wedding and to start their life together. Miriam grew stronger daily, practicing with her crutches until she could move about with relative ease. The other ranch hands teased Ethan mercilessly when they heard about his engagement, but it was good-natured ribbing, and several of them offered their congratulations sincerely. Jack Sullivan, the foreman, pulled Ethan aside one evening. "You are a good worker, Fletcher," Sullivan said, leaning against the corral fence as the sun set over the mountains. "One of the best I have had. You want to bring your bride to live here at the ranch? There is a small cabin on the north section that is not being used. It is yours if you want it." Ethan felt gratitude well up in his chest. "That is generous, more than generous." Sullivan shrugged. "You will earn it, and truth be told, it will be good to have a woman around. Maybe she can teach some of these rough men some manners." Ethan laughed. "I will ask her, but I suspect she will be pleased." Finally, the day came when Dr. Harrison declared Miriam well enough to make the journey to the mining camp. Ethan borrowed a wagon from the ranch, filling the bed with blankets and pillows to make it as comfortable as possible for Miriam's still healing leg. The day was clear and bright, the storms of April giving way to the warmth of May, and wildflowers had indeed begun to bloom across the hillsides, just as Ethan had once promised Miriam they would. "It is beautiful," Miriam breathed as they traveled the rough road into the foothills. "You were right about California." "Just wait until you see it in summer," Ethan said, handling the reins with easy confidence, "when the grass is gold and the oaks are dark green against it, when you can smell the pine from the high country on the breeze." "I will see it," Miriam said, reaching over to take his hand. "We will see it together." The mining camp was a rough collection of tents and ramshackle cabins clinging to the side of a mountain where someone had once found gold, and now dozens of men searched for more with varying degrees of success. Miriam directed Ethan to a small cabin near the edge of the camp, and before they had even fully stopped, the door burst open and a man came rushing out. Thomas Foster was a weathered man in his late 40s, his face lined by sun and worry, his hands calloused from years of hard labor. But his eyes were kind, and when he saw Miriam, they filled with tears. "My girl," he said, his voice breaking. "My dear girl." Ethan helped Miriam down from the wagon, and Thomas swept her into his arms, holding her tightly while she clung to him and cried. Ethan stood back, giving them their moment, his throat tight with emotion at the sight of their reunion. Finally, Thomas pulled back, looking Miriam over carefully, his gaze lingering on the splint still on her leg. "The man who brought the message said you were caught in a mudslide. Said someone pulled you out. I have been half mad with worry and half mad with gratitude to whoever saved you." "That would be me, sir," Ethan said, stepping forward and extending his hand. "Ethan Fletcher. I was driving cattle in the area when I heard your daughter call for help." Thomas shook his hand with a grip like iron, pumping it vigorously. Then I owe you a debt I can never repay. My daughter is everything to me, everything." "You do not owe me anything," Ethan said sincerely, "but I do need to speak with you about something important." Thomas looked between Ethan and Miriam, noting the way they stood close together, the way their hands were linked. A slow smile spread across his weathered face. "Is that so? Well then, come inside. Let us talk properly." Inside the cabin, which was as drafty and rough as Miriam had described, they sat around a simple wooden table. Miriam made coffee on the pot-bellied stove, moving about on her crutches with practiced ease, while Ethan gathered his courage. "Mr. Foster," he began, "I know this is sudden. Your daughter and I have known each other only a short time, but in that time, I have come to care for her deeply. More than care. I love her, sir. I want to marry her, to build a life with her. I'm asking for your blessing." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on his daughter rather than on Ethan. "Miriam, this is what you want?" "Yes, Papa," Miriam said, coming to stand beside Ethan, her hand on his shoulder. "I know it is fast, but it feels right. Ethan is a good man. He's kind and brave and honest. He makes me happy. He makes me hope for the future." "After your mother died," Thomas said slowly, "I brought you out here thinking we would make a new start, find fortune, build something. But I have given you nothing but hardship. I break my back in those mines and have nothing to show for it but a cough and an aching back." He looked at Ethan now, his gaze searching. "Can you give her more than that? Can you give her the life she deserves?" "I will spend every day of my life trying," Ethan said firmly. "I have a job, steady work at a good ranch. The foreman has offered us a cabin there. It is not much yet, but it is a start. And I have dreams of my own place someday, a few acres we can build on. I cannot promise riches, but I can promise that she will never doubt that she is loved, that she will always have a home and someone to stand beside her." Thomas's eyes were shining now. "That is all any father can hope for his daughter. You have my blessing, son. You have it with my whole heart." They married 3 weeks later in the small church in Oroville on a warm June morning. Miriam wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself with fabric Ethan had bought her, and she carried wildflowers that grew in the meadows around the town. Her father walked her down the aisle, his back straight with pride, and when he placed her hand in Ethan's, he whispered, "Take care of my girl." "With my life," Ethan whispered back. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Dr. Harrison attended, along with Jack Sullivan and several of the ranch hands. A few townspeople who had heard the story of the dramatic rescue also came, curious to see the couple who had found love in such unusual circumstances. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and told Ethan he could kiss his bride, Ethan cupped Miriam's face gently in his hands and kissed her with all the love and promise he had in his heart. The small congregation applauded, and Miriam laughed against his lips, joyful and bright. The celebration afterward was held at the hotel restaurant, a modest affair but filled with warmth and good wishes. Thomas Foster stood and gave a toast, his voice thick with emotion. "To my daughter Miriam, the strongest woman I know, who survived the mountain's fury and found love in the process. And to Ethan, the man who would not give up, who dug her free with his bare hands and then won her heart with his gentle soul. May you have all the happiness you both deserve." "To Miriam and Ethan," the guests echoed, raising their glasses. That night, Ethan carried Miriam over the threshold of the small cabin on the north section of the ranch, both of them laughing as he nearly hit her head on the doorframe. Inside, the cabin was simple but clean, with a bed, a stove, a table, and 2 chairs. It was not much, but it was theirs. "Welcome home, Mrs. Fletcher," Ethan said, setting Miriam gently on her feet. "Home," Miriam repeated, looking around with shining eyes. "Our home." They stood together in the lamplight, and Ethan pulled Miriam close, mindful still of her leg, which was healing, but not yet fully strong. "I love you," he said, the words coming easier now, though no less meaningful. "I will love you all my days." "And I love you," Miriam replied, her arms around his neck. "My hero. My husband." That night they began their life together in earnest, learning each other in new and intimate ways, building the foundation of a partnership that would carry them through all the years to come. The months that followed were full of hard work and simple joys. Ethan continued his work at the ranch, often gone long hours with the cattle, but he always came home to Miriam, and that made every hardship worthwhile. Miriam healed fully, her leg growing strong again, and she threw herself into making their small cabin into a true home. She planted a garden, coaxing vegetables from the rocky soil with the same determination that had kept her alive in the mudslide. She sewed curtains for the windows and made quilts for their bed. And she began to experiment with baking, using the small stove to create breads and pies that soon had all the ranch hands finding excuses to stop by. "You're going to make me fat," Ethan complained one evening, though he was smiling as he ate a second piece of apple pie. "You work it off easily enough," Miriam replied, sitting across from him at their table. "Besides, I need the practice. If I'm going to open a bakery someday, I need to perfect my recipes." "Your mother would be proud," Ethan said softly, and Miriam's eyes filled with happy tears. "I think she would," she agreed. "I think she would be proud of all of it, the life we are building." As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, they settled into a rhythm. Thomas Foster came to visit when he could, usually staying a few days before returning to the mining camp. He looked older each time, more worn down, and Ethan worried. "Your father should not be in those mines anymore," he said to Miriam one night after Thomas had left following a brief visit. "The work is killing him." "I know," Miriam said sadly. "But what else can he do? The mine is all he knows now." "He could come here," Ethan suggested. "Live with us. There is work at the ranch, not mining but other things, tending stock, mending fences, easier work for a man his age." Miriam looked at him with such love it made Ethan's chest tight. "You would do that? Have my father live with us?" "He is family," Ethan said simply. "And this cabin is small, but we could build an addition. I have been saving. We have enough." So in the early months of 1879, Thomas Foster left the mining camp for good and came to live with his daughter and son-in-law. True to his word, Ethan built an addition to the cabin, a small room with its own entrance where Thomas could have privacy. The older man took to ranch work better than expected, his lifetime of hard labor translating well to the physical demands of caring for cattle and horses. "I should have left those mines years ago," Thomas admitted one evening as they all sat around the table eating dinner. "This is real work, honest work, and I get to see my daughter happy. That alone is worth everything." "You are happy, are you not, Papa?" Miriam asked, reaching across to squeeze her father's hand. "Happier than I have been since your mother passed," Thomas said honestly. "You two have given me a new life, a good life." That spring, Miriam discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan one evening as they sat outside their cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach and said simply, "We are going to have a baby." Ethan felt the world tilt and right itself in a new configuration. A baby. Their baby. The product of their love. The next chapter in their story. "Miriam," he breathed, pulling her close. "Are you certain?" "Dr. Harrison confirmed it yesterday," she said, laughing and crying at once. "We're going to be parents, Ethan." "We're going to be parents," he repeated, the wonder of it washing over him. Then he was kissing her, his hands cradling her face, his heart so full he thought it might burst. Thomas was equally overjoyed at the news, already talking about being a grandfather, about teaching his grandchild to ride and rope. The ranch hands congratulated Ethan with backslaps and good-natured jokes about sleepless nights and dirty diapers. The pregnancy was not easy. Miriam suffered from sickness in the early months and fatigue that worried Ethan constantly. But she bore it with her characteristic strength, never complaining, always focused on the life growing within her. "I am stronger than I look," she reminded Ethan when he fussed over her. "I survived a mudslide, remember? I can handle a baby." As Miriam's belly grew round with their child, Ethan found himself working harder than ever, driven by the need to provide, to build something lasting for his growing family. He talked to Jack Sullivan about his dreams of his own place, and the foreman, who had become a good friend, helped him scout properties. "There's a parcel about 5 miles south of here," Sullivan said one day as they rode the property lines. 20 acres, good water, decent grazing. The man who owned it died last year, and his widow is looking to sell. Might be worth talking to her." Ethan did talk to her, and after some negotiation, they came to an agreement. It would take most of his savings, but the land would be his. 20 acres of California earth where he could run his own cattle, build his own future. He told Miriam that evening, nervous about how she would react to him spending so much of their carefully hoarded money. But she threw her arms around him, as much as her pregnant belly would allow, and cried happy tears. "This is wonderful," she said. "This is everything we dreamed about." "We will still live here for now," Ethan explained. "I will work the ranch and our land both until we can afford to build a house. It will be hard." "Hard is what we do best," Miriam replied with a smile. "Look how we started. Everything since has been easier than that." She was right, Ethan realized. They had begun in mud and rain and desperation, and everything since had been building toward something better. They could handle hard. On a cold December morning, Miriam went into labor. Ethan was out with the cattle when Thomas came riding hard, shouting that it was time. Ethan raced back to the cabin, his heart in his throat, to find Dr. Harrison already there and Miriam in the bedroom, her face pale but determined. "Go away," she told Ethan, even as she gripped his hand hard enough to hurt. "You should not be here for this." "I am not going anywhere," Ethan replied, sitting beside the bed. "I stayed with you through the mudslide. I am staying with you through this." Dr. Harrison looked like he wanted to object, but something in Ethan's face must have convinced him to keep silent. So Ethan stayed, holding Miriam's hand, whispering encouragement, his heart breaking and remaking itself with every cry of pain she made. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Ethan was truly afraid, memories of losing his own mother flashing through his mind. But Miriam was strong, stronger than anyone gave her credit for, and finally, as the winter sun was setting, their son came into the world with a loud, angry cry. "A boy, Doctor," Harrison announced, wrapping the baby in clean blankets. "A healthy boy." He placed the baby in Miriam's arms, and Ethan leaned over them both, his vision blurring with tears. The baby was red and wrinkled and perfect, with a shock of dark hair in his mother's eyes. "Hello, little one," Miriam whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "Hello, my sweet boy." "What should we call him?" Ethan asked, touching his son's tiny hand, marveling when the baby's fingers wrapped around his. "I was thinking," Miriam said, looking up at Ethan with tired but joyful eyes. "Maybe Thomas, after my father, if that is all right with you." "Thomas Fletcher," Ethan said, trying out the name. "It is perfect. He is perfect." When they finally let Thomas Foster come in to meet his grandson, the older man wept openly, holding the baby with shaking hands and whispering prayers of thanksgiving. The winter passed in a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Little Thomas, called Tommy by everyone, was a healthy baby with a strong set of lungs and an appetite to match. Miriam recovered well from the birth, though Ethan caught her sometimes staring at their son with a mixture of fierce love and disbelief, as if she could not quite believe this was her life now. "What are you thinking?" he asked one night as they both sat watching Tommy sleep in his cradle. "I'm thinking about that day on the mountain," Miriam said softly. "When the mud came down and I was trapped. I was so certain I was going to die, Ethan. I had accepted it. And then I heard your voice and you were there and you would not let me go." "I could not," Ethan said simply. "I know. And because you would not, I have all of this. You, our home, our son, a whole life I never would have had." She turned to look at him, tears shining in her eyes. "Every day is a gift. Every single day." Ethan pulled her close, careful not to wake the baby. "Every day with you is a gift to me, too. You and Tommy are my whole world." As 1880 arrived and then progressed through its seasons, Ethan began the work of developing their 20 acres. On his days off from the ranch, he worked his own land, building fences, digging a well, starting construction on a small barn. Thomas helped when he could, and some of the other ranch hands volunteered their time in exchange for Miriam's baking or just out of friendship. It was slow work, done in the margins of his regular job, but bit by bit, the property took shape. Ethan bought a few head of cattle with what little money he could save, the beginnings of his own herd. He dreamed of the day when he could leave the ranch and work his own land full-time, be his own boss, build the legacy he wanted to leave for Tommy. Miriam, meanwhile, had begun selling her baked goods in town. What started as a few loaves of bread and some pies sold from a table on Main Street grew into a regular business. People came from all over Oroville to buy her goods, drawn by the quality and by the story of the woman who had survived the mudslide. "I am making enough that we can put some away," Miriam told Ethan excitedly one evening, counting the coins from her sales, "toward building our house on the property." "You should use it for your bakery," Ethan protested, "for the shop you have always wanted." "The bakery can wait," Miriam said firmly. "Right now, we build our home. Together." By the fall of 1881, nearly 3.5 years after the day Ethan had pulled Miriam from the mud, they were ready to make the move to their own property. Ethan had built a modest house, just 4 rooms, but it was solid and well made, with a stone fireplace and a wide porch that looked out over their land. There was a barn for the animals and a chicken coop that Miriam had insisted on. "It is not much," Ethan said as they stood looking at it, Thomas beside them holding 2-year-old Tommy. "It is everything," Miriam corrected, tears in her eyes. "It is ours, Ethan. Ours." They moved in on a crisp October day, their few possessions loaded into a borrowed wagon. Jack Sullivan had wished Ethan well, sorry to lose a good worker, but happy to see him achieving his dreams. Thomas Foster had decided to stay in the cabin at the ranch, finding he enjoyed the community of the bunkhouse and the regular work, though he visited his daughter and grandson frequently. That first night in their own house, on their own land, Ethan and Miriam stood on the porch after putting Tommy to bed. The stars were brilliant overhead, the air was cool and clean, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "We did it," Miriam said, leaning against Ethan's side. "We really did it." "You had doubts?" Ethan asked, amused. "Sometimes," Miriam admitted. "Sometimes I wondered if we were foolish, dreaming so big. But then I would remember that day on the mountain and how you refused to give up, and I would think that if we could survive that, we could do anything." "We can do anything," Ethan agreed, kissing the top of her head. Together. The years that followed were full and good, marked by hard work and simple pleasures. Ethan's small herd grew, and their ranch, which they called the Mudslide Ranch, in honor of how their story began, gained a reputation for quality cattle and honest dealing. Miriam finally got her bakery, a small shop in town that she ran with the help of a young woman from Oroville, allowing her to balance business with motherhood. Tommy grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and the animals. He had his mother's quick mind and his father's steady temperament, and watching him grow was one of Ethan's greatest joys. In 1884, Miriam gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Emma after Ethan's mother. She was a quiet baby compared to Tommy's boisterous infancy, with Ethan's blue eyes and a temperament that was content to observe the world around her. Thomas Foster lived to see both his grandchildren, spending his final years in the cabin at the Double Bar Ranch, surrounded by friends and visited often by his family. He passed peacefully in his sleep in 1885, and they buried him in the Oroville Cemetery with a stone that read, "Beloved Father and Grandfather." "He was happy at the end," Miriam said as they stood by his grave. "He told me once that coming to California had cost him so much, but it had also given him so much. He got to see me happy, see his grandchildren. He said that made it all worthwhile." "He was a good man," Ethan said, his arm around his wife, his children beside them. "He raised an incredible daughter." As the 1880s progressed toward their end, the Fletcher's ranch continued to prosper. They added onto the house, creating more room for their growing children. Miriam's bakery became a cornerstone of Oroville's small business community, and she took pride in employing other women, giving them the opportunity to earn their own money and independence. Ethan and Miriam often took their children up into the foothills, teaching them about the land, about the mountains, about the wild beauty of California. On one such trip, when Tommy was about 10 and Emma 7, they passed near the place where the mudslide had occurred all those years ago. "That is where it happened," Miriam told her children, pointing to a scar on the mountainside that had long since been softened by new growth, but was still visible to those who knew where to look. "That is where your father saved my life." "Tell us the story again," Emma begged, as she always did. The tale of her parents' meeting was her favorite story, so Miriam told it, as she had told it dozens of times before, but it never grew old. She told them about the rain and the mud, about being trapped and terrified, about the cowboy who appeared out of nowhere and refused to give up. She told them about the long night at the doctor's house, about falling in love while she healed, about the life they had built together. "And none of us would be here if Daddy had not dug Mama out," Tommy said, understanding the gravity of it in the way that children sometimes do. "That is right," Ethan said, pulling Miriam close. "The best decision I ever made was not giving up. The best gift I ever received was your mother's life." "And my gift was you," Miriam added, kissing Ethan's cheek. "All of you, this whole beautiful life." By 1890, 12 years after that fateful day in the rain, the Fletchers were one of the most respected families in Oroville. Their ranch was successful, Miriam's bakery was thriving, and their children were healthy and happy. Ethan was 34 years old, still strong and capable, with silver just beginning to show at his temples. Miriam was 32, her beauty having deepened with age and motherhood, her spirit as fierce and determined as ever. They had been through hard times, certainly. There had been droughts that tested the ranch, illnesses that scared them, setbacks that required resilience and faith. But they had weathered every storm together, their partnership stronger for having been tested. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Miriam said, "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had not heard me that day? If you had been somewhere else, or the wind had been blowing the wrong way and my screams had not reached you?" "No," Ethan said honestly. "I do not think about that. It is too terrible to contemplate." "But it so easily could have happened that way," Miriam persisted. 100 small things had to align perfectly for you to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. "Then I am grateful for every one of those 100 small things," Ethan said, taking her hand. "I am grateful for the rain that made me move the cattle, for the route I chose, for the way the wind was blowing, for whatever divine providence put me there to hear you, because every good thing in my life stems from that moment." "And in mine," Miriam said softly. "Sometimes I still have nightmares about the mud, about the crushing weight of it, about thinking I would die there alone. But then I wake up and you are beside me, and our children are sleeping safely in their rooms, and this life we have built surrounds me. And I think that maybe I had to go through that terror to get to this joy." "You deserved the joy without the terror," Ethan said firmly. "But since that is how it happened, I am glad I was there. I am glad I could be the one to pull you free." "My hero," Miriam said, echoing the words she had spoken so many years ago in Dr. Harrison's surgery. "My cowboy hero." "Just your husband," Ethan corrected, "just the man who loves you more than life itself." They kissed as the sun set over their land, over the mountains where their story had begun, over the life they had built together through determination and love and unwavering faith in each other. In the years that followed, the 20th century arrived, bringing changes to Oroville and to California, but the Fletchers remained a constant, their ranch and their family growing stronger with each passing year. Tommy eventually took over much of the ranch work, while Emma showed a talent for baking that rivaled her mother's. They both married in time, bringing their own spouses into the Fletcher family, and before long, Ethan and Miriam were grandparents themselves. "Do you remember what you told me once?" Miriam asked Ethan one evening when they were in their 60s, sitting on the same porch they had sat on for decades, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. "That day you asked me to marry you, you said you could not promise me riches, but you could promise I would always have a home and someone to stand beside me." "I remember," Ethan said, his hand finding hers automatically, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "You gave me so much more than that," Miriam said, her eyes shining. "You gave me everything. A life beyond my wildest dreams, children and grandchildren, success and purpose. But most of all, you gave me love. Every single day for all these years, you have loved me without fail." "Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done," Ethan replied. "It is as natural as breathing." "Tell me the story," Miriam said suddenly. "The way you remember it. Tell me about the day you saved me." Ethan smiled. She asked him this sometimes, wanted to hear his perspective on the day that had changed both their lives. "I was moving cattle," he began, his voice taking on the cadence of a story told many times. "It was raining hard, had been for days. I was tired and cold and thinking about getting back to the bunkhouse, and then I heard you scream." Miriam settled against his shoulder, listening as she always did, even though she knew every word. "Ah, it was the most desperate sound I had ever heard," Ethan continued. It cut right through the rain and the wind and went straight to my heart. I did not think. I just reacted, left the cattle and rode toward the sound, and then I saw you, just your head and one arm visible above the mud, and I knew I had to get you out. There was no question, no debate, just the certainty that I could not let you die there. What did you think when you first saw me? Miriam asked, as she always did at this point in the story. I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen, Ethan said honestly. You were trapped, likely in terrible pain, probably certain you were going to die. But you were fighting. You were still trying, still calling for help. I saw that strength in you right away. And then you dug me out with your bare hands, Miriam prompted. And then I dug you out with my bare hands, Ethan agreed. The mud was so heavy, so stubborn, it did not want to give you up. But I was more stubborn. I was not going to let it win. I was not going to let it take you from a world where I had just found you. You did not even know me, Miriam said, as she always did. I did not know your name or your history, Ethan acknowledged, but I knew you. From the moment I knelt beside you in that mud, I knew you in all the ways that mattered. I knew you were strong and brave. I knew you deserved to live. I knew I wanted to be part of your story. And you have been, Miriam said, tears in her eyes, as they always were when he told this story. You have been my whole story, Ethan Fletcher. The best chapter, the best part, the best everything. As you have been mine, Ethan said, kissing her forehead. As you have been mine. They sat together as the evening deepened, watching their grandchildren play, listening to the sounds of their family around them, grateful for every moment of the life they had built together. The mud had come down the mountain and trapped her. The cowboy had dug her out with his bare hands, and from that desperate, muddy beginning had grown a love that would last all their days, a family that would carry their story forward, a legacy of hope and courage and the unshakable belief that love could triumph over any adversity. Years later, when they were both old and gray, their bodies worn by decades of hard work, but their love as strong as ever, Miriam asked Ethan one final time to tell her the story of how they met. They were in bed, Miriam's health finally failing after a long and full life, and Ethan knew this might be the last time she asked. So he told her, his voice steady despite the tears on his cheeks. He told her about the rain and the mud and the sound of her scream. He told her about digging her free, about refusing to give up, about the moment he first saw her face clearly and knew his life had changed forever. He told her about falling in love during her recovery, about their wedding, about building their ranch and raising their children and growing old together. It has been a good life, Miriam whispered when he finished, her hand weak in his. The best life. The very best, Ethan agreed, because I got to live it with you. I love you, Ethan Fletcher, Miriam said. I have loved you from that very first day when you knelt beside me in the mud and promised you would not let me die. I love you, Miriam Fletcher, Ethan replied. I will love you beyond my last breath and into whatever comes after. Miriam passed peacefully that night, surrounded by her family, her hand in Ethan's. He held her as she slipped away, whispering his love to her until the very end, keeping his promise to stand beside her always. Ethan lived another 2 years without her, cared for by his children and grandchildren, finding purpose in sharing stories of Miriam and the life they had built. He told their story to anyone who would listen, wanting the world to know about the woman who had been so strong, so brave, so full of life and love. When his own time came, Ethan went peacefully as well, and his last words were, Miriam, I am coming. They buried him beside her in the Oroville cemetery, under a shared stone that read, Ethan and Miriam Fletcher. Together in life, together in death, together forever. He saved her from the mountain. She saved him with her love. Their children and grandchildren continued the ranch and the bakery, keeping the family businesses alive and thriving. The story of how Ethan and Miriam met became a legend in Oroville, passed down through generations, a reminder that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that heroism came in many forms, and that the most extraordinary lives often began with a single moment of courage. The Mudslide Ranch remained in the Fletcher family for over a century, a testament to what two people could build when they refused to give up on each other. And on rainy days, when the mountains were shrouded in mist and the earth smelled of wet pine, people in Oroville would sometimes tell the story of the mud that came down the mountain and trapped a young woman, and the cowboy who dug her out with his bare hands, saving not just her life but creating a legacy of love that would endure for generations. It was a story of survival and salvation, of courage and determination, but most of all, it was a love story. The kind of love story that reminded people why they believed in fate and destiny and the idea that some people were simply meant to find each other, no matter what obstacles stood in their way. The kind of love story that proved that from the darkest, most terrifying moments could come the brightest, most beautiful futures. The kind of love story that people told their children and grandchildren, hoping they too might one day find a love that strong, that true, that enduring. And in the retelling, the story lived on, just as Ethan and Miriam's love lived on, eternal and unbreakable, a light in the darkness, a promise kept, a life fully lived and fully loved.